Welcome to Political Punks. I'm your host, Brett R. Smith. Let's welcome our guests. First up, Braxton McCoy, Brian Urso, and our buddy Christian Toto. Christian, tell everybody your big news, because you have some exciting big news before we jump into everything.
Yeah, I'm transitioning, so I'm really excited. No. I've got a new podcast with a great logo. It's coming out this week. It's called Right on Hollywood. And I was actually podcasting for a while, but then the pandemic hit. I had two young boys around the house, and I didn't have a moment to myself, let alone a chance to record a podcast. So I wanted to kind of bring it back, and I'm doing so with justthenews.com. So there's a great site. They really care about quality, they care about journalism, run by John Solomon. So I'm sort of on their podcast network, and it's coming this week.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that site. Next to Bongino, that's kind of my go-to, because John's just kind of got a great reputation, and you just read that stuff, and it's just straight up news, man. I mean, it's not, there's no spin there, I suppose.
Yeah. I write for them from time to time, and when I file a story, they want me to get people from the left, from the right. They're not looking for partisan pieces from me. They want to make sure it's more accurate, more balanced whenever possible. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just got to go to alternative media at this point. I don't even watch Fox anymore. Like once in a while I tune into Tucker. I'm more satisfied at this point with like Newsmax and The First. Dana's got a great show. Jesse Kelly. Greg Kelly is fantastic. Greg Kelly's tweets are insanely funny. He tweeted the other day that he ate 16 Fruity Pebble breakfast bars all in one sitting. And he's like, and I feel terrible. It's like, really? I was like, I don't think those things are even meant to be eaten that many servings in one sitting. So I was kind of like, and he posted a picture of the boxes. And so then like later he tweeted another picture of him like in this big Barca lounger in his chair. And off to the side are two empty boxes of these fucking breakfast bars. And I was like, so you really did eat them? I was just like, this is disgusting, dude. Ugh. But I mean, and then like he tweeted the other day, like a picture of an ice cream sandwich. And he's like, the ice cream sandwich, excellent dessert, very refreshing, and that's it. But it's between the political stuff and like that stuff, I'm just like, this guy's hilarious, and he's fun to follow. But yeah, alternative media all the way at this point. All right.
Would you consider Jesse alternative media though? He's corporate press, man. At least that's what I tell him when we text.
Yeah. I mean, you think so with The First?
I mean, I don't know. I think anyone who's a journalist that's kind of approaching mainstream is corporate press. I mean,
is Jesse mainstream at this point?
I mean, he's nationally syndicated. He never shuts up about it. So,
True. True. And he's on Tucker. I mean, he's on Fox more and more. They've banned Rudy and they've banned Bernie Carrick off Fox, but Jesse's getting, yeah. They didn't have, this is why I didn't watch Fox I didn't really watch anything on 9/11 because it's just not something I really want to rehash. But Fox did all this 9/11 shit on the anniversary, and they didn't have Rudy on. It's just like, how is that even possible? How is that even? I don't even know how
America's mayor you're not going to have on. That's bizarre.
Well, it's Lachlan Murdoch, who's the son of Rupert, who's been running Fox, I think, since like 2019. I think he's the one that brought guys like Paul Ryan onto the board. I mean, you just look at the money. I mean, he donates to Democrats. He's a total leftist. Yeah. And I think he wanted to slide Fox more towards left of center, I think, in order, because they all think that there's more audience there. Yeah. But I, when I look at guys like that, I'm just like, that's why Rudy's not on. That's why, it's a complete change. And frankly, that network has never been the same since Ailes passed away. I mean, he's the genius behind it. I give a lot of credit to Rupert from the standpoint of entertainment, like Tracy Ullman and The Simpsons and Married with Children. I mean, all these shows wouldn't exist without that guy. 21 Jump Street. But really, Ailes, that's the guy who made Fox News really, really hum and grow. So, anyway.
I think the one thing I did then recently is with the Gutfeld show. Not that it's an amazing show. We can kind of debate whether it's good or bad or different, but it just showed there's such a need for that on late night TV. That's now the biggest late night show in just a few months. And, no A-list stars, no big budget.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious. I love it. I watch it every night. I think it's hilarious.
It's offering something different. That's all you need.
Comedy, like real comedy,
right?
You know, satire and parody. Those are the staples of like what my generation grew up on. A lot of millennials as well, older millennials grew up on the same type of humor. So it's like there's such a vacuum there, and I'm just kind of blown away. I wasn't really surprised when he captured the #1 spot. What surprises me is that he's holding it.
Yeah,
you know, he's maintaining that, and he's retaining and growing his audience, and it just goes to show that people. And it's the same with the stand-up comedians. I think people are hungry for, you know, any kind of real comedy at this point.
Authenticity and truth. Like they want to see people saying things that they actually believe, you know?
Yeah.
That's what I think
reflecting what we think too. That's part of it.
Yes, definitely. Yes, sir. And don't you think that the Murdoch thing is kind of, excuse me, the Rudy thing is kind of connected to this? Like our culture does this thing now where if you do something that we don't like later on in your life, then we pretend that everything you did before that didn't exist. And it's different than canceling. Canceling is one thing, but we do this thing where we sort of, it's almost like the old like Plains Indian tribes would have like a ceremony. The Northern Cheyenne, they'd have like a ceremony for an old person and then be like, hey, leave, because you know we're not feeding you anymore, and just like kick them off out into the desert and they would die. And we do kind of the opposite of that, where it's like as soon as you do something that someone on the left, it seems like, deems to be an irredeemable act, then we have to like wipe you off of the sort of cultural map.
How is that not like just positively Soviet?
It is.
Roseanne Barr.
Yeah, Roseanne Barr. That's a great example. Yes.
One tweet. It was a terrible tweet. There's no way to defend it. It's an ugly, awful tweet. But she had this decades-long career. She shattered real significant glass ceilings for women in comedy, women in sitcoms, women in general in Hollywood. She was very supportive. She would actually outreach to Black writers and try to get them on her show. All gone, wiped away. One awful tweet.
Yeah, even Christopher Hitchens had to admit that she was funny, and he had that famous Vanity Fair article. You know, I mean, she was very, very talented. It's a great example.
You know, it's funny because I found when all that happened, somebody dug up a photo shoot that she had done for a Jewish magazine. And she was dressed as Hitler in a kitchen, and she had a sheet of cookies that were all burnt. And I thought it was funny. I mean, I laughed, but at the same time, I also think National Lampoon's Stranger in Paradise is one of the funniest things ever, which is one of the guys at the National Lampoon in the 70s ran into some stranger on the street in Manhattan who looked an awful lot like Adolf Hitler. He just didn't have a mustache. So they hired this guy. They travel down to Tahiti and they do a photo shoot of Hitler dressed in, you know, the full garb and the mustache. And he's like on the beach and he's like talking with like natives, you know, and he's like picking a coconut off of a tree. You know, they did all this stuff in like a week. And like, I think it was Michelle Coquette and Tony Hedra. I think those are the two guys sort of behind that whole thing. But it's just hilarious. So, I mean, there's been so many parodies of Hitler. Even the Larry Sanders Show, Gary Shandling did an unbelievably funny thing with Hank. They turned him Adolf Hankler. And Jon Stewart was a part of the show. There's so many funny parodies with Hitler, and it's just sort of like, if we can't laugh at this stuff, you know, we're almost like losing humanity.
And keep in mind, a lot of those writers for the Gary Shandling were Jewish writers. So, I mean, how empowering is that you're taking the worst human being that ever walked the planet, and you being a subset of the community that he destroyed are parodying him on national TV? That's brilliant. That's
is there any better revenge?
That's the best. That's the best. You know, it's funny you're talking about late night. When I was a kid, Johnny Carson still is the funniest person that I ever saw. And Johnny Carson made fun of the right, but he also made fun of the left. He made fun of everybody. And that's unsafe comedy. That's correct comedy, because comedy's not supposed to be safe. It's not supposed to align with a party. It's supposed to rankle feathers. And that's what those guys did back then. Now it's like you might as well have a DNC symbol behind like Jimmy Kimmel. You know, it's ridiculous.
It's all. It's check your tuning in your TV. It's actually there. By the way, do you know that the National Lampoon, the brand, was bought a couple of years ago, and they created a podcast, like this new group of young comedians. It was super woke. I saw a couple of teasers for it. It was unbelievably bad, and I don't know what happened to it because it never kind of cracked the zeitgeist. I've never heard a thing about it. They must have just crashed and burned. But the guy behind it really wanted to make a woke National Lampoon, which, I mean, it's like saying I want to make Cadillacs that are, you know, mini cars. I mean, what's the point if you're going to take that brand and just absolutely trash it and reinvent it in a way that is not recognizable? But that's what they did, and no one cared.
Once they got website cracked, was really funny for the longest time, and then slowly they started hiring people that were, you know, indoctrinated into this far left bullshit, and then it started to become woke. Now Cracked is off limits for me because it was no different than Mad. You know, Cracked was a competitor to Mad magazine. I read a lot of it in the 80s, and it was really funny. They had good artists. You know, speaking of the Lampoon, there's a brilliant, amazing documentary on the Lampoon called Drunk, Stoned, Brilliant, Dead. It's about an hour and a half. And they interview nearly everybody from the old Lampoon and kind of that secondary incarnation in the late 70s, early 80s when P.J. O'Rourke took over, because the founders, Doug Kenny and Henry Beard, left after a certain period of time in about the mid 70s. And then they went on to become producers. Beard retired, but Doug Kenny went on to do Animal House and Caddyshack and then ended up dying young. But Doug and Henry would be just appalled at what the Lampoon has become. And one of the things that Tony Hedra says in the documentary is that the job of a satirist is to challenge authority and to make authority and those in power really, really, really uncomfortable. And that's what they did back then. They went after everybody. Right. They went after the left equally as they went after the right. And it's just some of the most brilliant satire. And that's probably like early Lampoon, 71 to like 75. Once P.J. O'Rourke came in, it became a little bit more political. And you had John Hughes become a writer. And John's stuff is hilarious. Some of it's like really perverse, but it's really funny. You get to see a side of John that you never saw in the movies. And it's a very different side of John in the Lampoon. He was conservative, wasn't he?
He was. In fact, he and P.J. O'Rourke did this thing where they had this full-page spread called the Pants Down Republican Party. And it has all of these platforms and things that they believe in. And when you go and you read through it, it reads like a platform for the Tea Party. Yeah. It's very nationalist. It's very kind of loose, but at the same time, it has very set certain principles that are conservative, right of center. But at the same time, these are coming from guys who were classic liberals in that sense. So it's like,
to be fair to modern comedians, guys like Stephen Colbert, they speak truth to power. They really take down Mike Lindell. So they're kind of keeping that tradition.
You know, when comedy was at its best, it was actually a rejection of politics. Like, you know, that's why it looked like it was left and right. It was more just a rejection of the entire thing. It was kind of what libertarian shitposters pretend to be on Twitter, you know?
It's more, they were more challenging the system. You know, Harold Ramis is more than likely probably voted Democrat his whole life. But look at his movies and look at who the villains always are. You know, in Caddyshack, it's the snobs, it's Judge Smales, it's all these assholes at the country club. You know, I always tell people that Ghostbusters is a libertarian movie. It's a conservative movie. It's a startup business movie. In fact,
think about like the bad guy.
The bad guy's the EPA guy. He's the guy.
He's a far left hippie guy.
He shuts the fucking grid down, which then floods the entire. I mean, they had a problem with the grid to begin with. They were referencing the Twinkie joke, but the really big Twinkie. But it's kind of like Walter Peck came in and absolutely exasperated it. They probably would have figured out what to do with the grid, maybe some kind of sub storage. But he comes in and just fucks everything up and destroys that great building and then destroys New York. But time and time again, a lot of these movies, whether it's Animal House or these 80s, 90s movies, the villain is always the man. Some someone in control, some kind of authoritarian.
Right.
And it's the little guy that rises up to defeat. It's always a David and Goliath. And that's kind of where the boomers sort of come from, I think, in a lot of ways, culturally, out of the 60s. That's Vietnam, women's suffrage, race, all that stuff is the glue that binds their generation together. Whereas the glue that binds our generation together is like movies and TV and pop culture, right, because that's really all we had. And I'm kind of ripping Tarantino on Joe Rogan. He was talking about that a couple weeks ago. It was a fascinating interview, but I never really thought about it that way. As far as like what binds Gen X together and why do we talk about pop culture so much? It's because that's what we grew up on. We didn't have Vietnam.
We didn't have the Vietnam during our. I mean, we had Grenada, but that was not. But
that was fun. Right. Without Grenada, you wouldn't have Heartbreak Ridge.
Right.
So
right. Like we didn't have like a Vietnam. We didn't have race. We didn't have like Selma. We had nothing like that. And second wave feminism was important because it got equal pay for them and stuff like that. And I thought that was it, and then it's sad because now all of a sudden it's like they're regressing back. I told my wife the other day, it's almost like, especially at Marvel Comics, it's almost like they want to erect walls to knock them, just to say they can knock them down again.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, like Mags Visaggio and these other horribly talented people, I don't care who they are, how they identify, they're not good writers. And I always say to them, Marvel and comics in general have been diverse since the 70s in both characters and content and creators. There's nothing you can knock down anymore. And I think that there's this chip on their shoulder. They have something to prove like that. Instead of putting their energy into writing good stories, it's this, I have to make a political statement. And
it's virtue signaling. It's ultimately just virtue signaling at every level. Christian, how many headlines have we had, like in the last, I don't know, 7 to 10 years, where it's like, finally a powerful female lead character? And I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, Rush always had that great line where he said, for most people, history began the day they were born. That's certainly true to young people. I mean, that was kind of true for me until, you start to grow up and realize that you're like this fly speck, in the middle of this very vast timeline of existence.
Thinking like 5 years, we're going to have headlines like historic Black female wins for the 15th time, and then maybe the 16th will be historic as well, like that kind of a thing. It's like it's almost cartoonish.
But they all have to. Brian's right. They all and Cersei's talked about this too, where he says, they make movies and they write entertainment, and it really doesn't matter if it's movies, comics, or TV. They write content for each other to pat each other on. Oh, I'm a good person. Yes, you are. You're such a good person. I'm just enamored with. That's what it is, and that's also how they get that's how they get jobs.
Right.
I always say, like, the new Hollywood casting couch is just proving how woke you are. It has nothing to do with, like, I don't know, rubbing up against some fat producer in a robe in his hotel room or doing the deed. I mean, the casting couch has been around forever, and it was, to a degree, I think it was consensual. But at the same time, it's like the new casting couch is, where do you fall on climate change? Where do you fall on BLM? Where do you fall on Antifa and, the rest? It's just kind of a joke. But we all grew up on strong lead female characters. Brian, you go back to the 60s and find diversity in Marvel Comics. I mean, you've got female leads like Jean Grey and others who are right at the forefront. And a lot of the times it's like, that's the thing about the X-Men. And they're talking about taking men out of the X-Men because it's, I don't know, it's not inclusive or something. But Jean Grey is like the most powerful X-Men. I mean, maybe even more powerful than Professor X. And it's a chick in the 70s. You know, I mean, you want to talk about avant-garde.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's like they want to do like a female Bond, and I'm like, assholes! You already had a female Bond in the 60s. She's named Emma Peel from the British Avengers.
Right.
I mean, that's like one of the best female characters of all time. And
what's her name?
Diana Rigg.
Diana Rigg, who's also in Her Majesty's Secret Service, the one and only George Lazenby Bond. She's fabulous in that too.
Absolutely, and again,
beautiful.
It's like, dude, look back at the work that's been done. It's been done. You know,
but again, Braxton, this is kind of gets back to what you're talking about, where it's just sort of like the past doesn't exist. All that exists is the right now. You know, it's and that's what I find with the left is like, it's advantageous and convenient to go back and erase the past, because then it's like the only thing that matters is what's happening right now. So precedent, you know, it means nothing. It means nothing. It's how you react to it right now.
And also, I think a lot of the news reporters are kind of young, so they don't even realize what's happened 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Sad,
They
man.
have like almost no interest in it at all. Like they just think that history doesn't matter, even if it's, you know, like a generational or like the generation before them. Back when I was doing stand up, this is the weird thing about wokeness. In fact, Drew Holden and I have talked about this, but you know, but wokeness was in stand-up comedy for a decade before people realized it. I remember listening to Rogan or somebody, and they were talking about how it was really weird to see this thing sort of crop up inside stand-up, but that's because they were up at this upper echelon where they're doing shows with Bill Burr and Dave Chappelle and these kind of people. Down at the level that I was at, wokeness was there literally in 2010, 2011. I mean, we would have, you go to a comedy club and they would set up the show based on diversity, and it would totally ruin the show. Like they would get a good feature act, they would try to get a pretty decent MC, and of course you'd have your headliner, whoever it may be, but then they would put 10-minute spots underneath and fill these with like the right trans Muslim black girl or whatever, you know, and put them under, and then have an Asian person. And these people were terrible. That, like, I remember watching this, you know, slobby, overweight gal on stage in fishnets talking about fucking tax code for 10 minutes. And we were like, bro, like we're making jokes here, man. Like, you're like, what are you, a fucking CPA?
Right.
Like, this is not like, what are we doing? But yeah, it's been there for a long time. And so like, it doesn't surprise me that it's kind of filtered into Hollywood in this way, because that's where writers come from, is those crappy clubs all over the country, kind of a middling comic, and then they get a gig writing for $50K a year, and they move into some shit apartment in Brooklyn. You know, I mean, that's how you kind of make it. But the minor leagues of comedic writing have been shit for a decade, and people just don't even know about it, you know?
I mean, I think what drives me crazy is, like, people always ask, how did Hitler take over? Well, it wasn't overnight. I mean, it was gradual. And you look back in the 90s when I was at university, that's when the term politically correct came out, you know, and every once in a while people would say that's un-PC, but it was, people for the most part threw it under the bus. And then, like what you were saying, Braxton, it got a little bit gradual. By, like you said, 2010, it starts to become, these people start infiltrating different subsets of entertainment, you know, whether it be comics, gaming. That one really hurts, because when I was I've been in the Dungeons and Dragons pair since '85, and it was always inclusive. At university, in my group, we had a black person, a woman. We had everybody in our group. It didn't matter. We just were there to play the game. And so they've infiltrated everything. So it's not like I can escape to another hobby, because that hobby's infested, you know. And
no, is, you know, look at what they do to Ernie Gygax. I know we're getting a little bit kind of into the weeds of D&D, but I mean, they went after him as well, and he kind of, I was on a live stream with him one time. He's the sweetest guy. Yeah. This is the son of the guy that created D&D, right. And you know, the woke mob went after him, and he capitulated and kind of apologized, and then it's like, yeah, that's how you make it worse. It's, you know, in the 80s and the 90s, you know, when you got PC stuff, you laughed at people, you mocked them. You might tell them to go fuck themselves, but it was kind of like, what are you, a pussy? Yeah. I mean, that was the response. We didn't put up with this type of shit. It was something that was in the minority, and it was something that nobody really accepted. But it's kind of 2000s, and then under Obama, everything just accelerated.
Then you had social media
everywhere.
Social media makes everything worse.
It does. It does, because you used to be able to have to earn, you know, the right to some kind of a platform to talk to people. Now it's kind of like, you know, it's nobody's special anymore. Now anybody can do it, which is good and bad. You know, I mean, I'm sitting here, you know, we're doing this, and it's kind of like because we can have a platform, but at the same time, it's just sort of like enabled the worst people and the worst in the worst people, I suppose.
Do you guys think that it's starting to get a little bit better, though? I'll give you you know, of course, I'm a horse trainer. I work in the agricultural ranching space. When I was a kid, Western Horseman was, you know, it's a magazine probably almost no one who listens to this has ever heard of, but Western Horseman was like basically the kind of the New Yorker of the ag world. You know, it would always feature people like Boots O'Neill from the 4-6s down in Texas, and just all these kind of legendary people within the field. Last 5 years or so, about 5 years ago, maybe a little more, it started to become like this new girl is a ranch hand on this place, and she would be like the cover, and she's been cowboying for like 4 seconds, but they would just put her there because, you know, just to score some kind of points. Well, then the next thing you know, my Western Horseman subscription became $12 a year, which is like, I know that they can't print that magazine for $1 a piece. Like there's just no freaking way. So obviously they're hemorrhaging money. Well, I noticed over maybe the last 6 months or so, it's starting to trend back toward that. They're showing like, you know, techniques and branding and different, you know, different ways to manage your animals, or a lot more about like horse training is coming back in, tack, like the kind of stuff that you would traditionally think of would belong in this thing. And it's starting to filter back in. And I think it's probably because they were losing a crap load of money for like 5 years. And I wonder if that's happening in other spaces that you guys are more, you know, attuned to.
I know that in comedy, there are some comedians who are kind of going against the grain and being really successful, like Tim Dillon, obviously Joe Rogan, just a free speech enthusiast. Ryan Long is amazing. JP Sears, Chrissy Mayer. So I think they're all kind of, they're all building this loyal following and realizing that, hey, I can avoid the system, the gatekeepers, and yet be a comedian on my terms, be successful, and be insulated from the craziness. So I'm more pessimistic than you are, but I think the more people realize there's an alternative way, and it's healthy, and they can survive there, then I think more people will be emboldened to speak out.
Do you think we're kind of balkanizing in the entertainment space? Just to anyone who wants to answer that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's Nick says we've got to create our own because the old system isn't salvageable. It's no different in Hollywood than it is at Marvel Comics. I mean, the gatekeepers, the editors, the people that hire creative, you know, you've got a litmus test there. And there was a Marvel artist recently who was fired because he drew a political cartoon that was pro Bolsonaro. This guy Ed Bennett, who was on the Incredible Hulk, which was having really good sales, had a solid writer. And then the writer threw this guy under the bus. The writer went on social media and said, I will no longer work with Ed Bennett. And if it means me leaving Marvel and him staying, or vice versa, but I'm never working with him again because he's pro Bolsonaro and he's a racist and a bigot and a Nazi and on and on and on. And I looked at this political cartoon. I could not see any. They said it was anti-Semitic, yet the people that were depicted are not Jewish, and they were depicted to look like rats in order to, and also to be like thieves. And then you have this Bolsonaro figure who's got this sword and he's up on a horse. It was actually pretty cool.
It tells more of the people that were complaining than Bennett, because it's like, if you see Jewish people and rats, you're the problem, not us. You know,
that's
like
how you react to it,
right? It's like the people that were saying that they were giving Gary Gygax Sr. a hard time because they were saying orcs represent black people, and I'm like, A, that's not true. Orcs were based off of the Vikings. That's where he got the idea from. And B, what is wrong with you that you see orcs and think of a black person?
Yeah, for real.
Holy Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, so it says more about the people complaining than sometimes if you sit back and do nothing, they expose themselves. They really do.
They always hang themselves.
We had the lady with the gorilla mask attacking Larry Elder, and not a peep from woke America, not a word.
Yeah.
It's because he was right of center. That's why, you know. And what bothers me is, it's a pattern. It's a pattern that happens every time. They love diversity. They love diversity. But the second a person of color displays what I consider the most important form of diversity, which is thought, and Lord forbid is center right, or even just normal liberal, you know, like a normal lefty, which is rare now, then the racist clause come out. Then you see what they're really like. You know, it's really sad. And Braxton, about your question, I think it's going to be one of those things about, I think different hobbies or different subsets of entertainment will have success with getting it back to normal. I think others won't. I think the music industry will never get back to normal.
It's got deeper problems than just woke. You know, that gets back to like album sales and shares. I mean, Alex Van Halen said, you know, since streaming, the music industry's never been the same. It's awful. It's dysfunctional. It's fucked up. You used to be able to get in the old music industry, when you'd sell an album after all expenses and everything, Van Halen would get $1 an album. I'm sure every band was different, but Van Halen got $1 an album, and then that was equally divided amongst the group, however they divided it. But it's, you know, when you're selling 250 million albums, you know, and then you know, of which you don't really make any money off that. You make money off touring, right? So it's like those guys were going out and doing those stadium tours, which, I mean, that doesn't happen anymore. Nobody can fill a stadium anymore. So it's kind of like, you know, there was an extra incentive, and then they go out and they sell merch as well at these
You'd be
shows.
shocked what I make per song.
Yeah.
Like if someone,
well, that's what Alex said. He said for every 250,000 streams, you get 50 cents.
Whoa.
Oh, I got one check came in. That's why I always tell people, don't stream, you know, please download. It might be a little bit more money, but I'll get more money, you know. But like one check was like for 5 cents. It was ridiculous because they literally, it's like 0.05 for each second you're on the stream. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's absolutely.
I'm still old school. I still like to buy CDs. The problem is a lot of stuff these days, a lot of times they don't release stuff on CDs like they did anymore. It's only streaming. Ryan Adams' self-titled album a couple of years ago, which I really liked, he didn't put it out on CD, and it really kind of bummed me out because I still like owning, you know, the hard copies, and I love the album art, and I love reading through everything and seeing who's credited.
You miss that whenever it's just digital. Like that was my point with the first two Gideon's Mob albums, is that I wanted them to have physical CDs, and it's the upcoming album is going to be the same thing. It's going to be CDs. The artwork is going to be very cool, very, you know, 70s, 60s ish, you know. Like now album art is like the band on the cover, and that's it.
It's just a cover, right? There's no, and it's the same with movie posters. In the 90s, they started to transition from the hand painted stuff that they would go out and hire guys like Drew Struzan and other guys to do, and then it just became sort of these Photoshop montages of everything. It's lazy, and it doesn't tell the story. It doesn't, you know, there's something about those kind of iconic, especially like the Hitchcock stuff and the stuff from the 60s. It's amazing stuff. It's not only like beautifully rendered and put together, but it tells a story, and those were the things that got meat in the seats. I mean, that's what sold it. You know, it wasn't necessarily the trailer or the movie itself. It was the artwork.
Like I think like Frazetta did a bunch of. I know he did the Gauntlet poster,
right,
and that poster is amazing, and it's like.
And it's not a very good movie. That's the thing.
It's okay. It's not great, but
it's the ending, dude. It's the fucking ending. It drives me crazy. I love it because it's filmed the year that I was born in Phoenix, and they have like the Civic Center and everything, which doubled for the police station. That's a convention hall. That was all brand new, and they have, you know, and I love the movie. I love the cast. I love everything. Sandra Lock never looked hotter. And it's the ending. It's called a crossfire. They have cops shooting at each other. I mean, it's just maddening to me. And I'm just like, did anybody on set say anything? Like,
it's almost like is that the editor's fault at that point?
It's Clint's fault. It's the writer's fault. It's the director's fault. I mean, anybody with I mean, they have cops lined. Have you guys, Brax? Have you ever seen this?
I don't know. Like
they're shooting at a bus, and they have cops lined up on this.
I feel like I've seen enough cop shooting videos on Twitter now to know that it's actually possible to have cops shooting at each other, because like not exactly the most tactically proficient bunch.
I did not serve, but I can identify a crossfire when I see one. So anyway, we're 43 minutes in and we haven't even tackled our main topic. So let's transition to Gattaca. So this story from the New York Post popped up a couple of weeks ago. This is from September 7th. And it just blew my mind. We're in the midst of vaccine mandates and all this stuff. So the headline is Rutgers bars unvaccinated student from attending virtual classes. So I was just kind of like, it's one thing to say the kid can't go into class because he's unvaccinated, but you're going to ban him from taking an online course where he's working remote in isolation, more than likely, a dorm room, an apartment. And I just immediately thought of Gattaca, and it just kind of popped in my mind when in the movie where they stick their finger on the little pricker, which identifies who they are, which is how you gain access to everything in the movie, job, probably apartment, probably everything. But it takes a blood sample of which the government has a DNA record of. When you're born, they register you. And it tells you if you're valid or invalid. And the valid are the higher class, the ones that have their genetics picked from birth, and then you have the invalid, which is this subset, this caste system, which are godchildren. They were born naturally without any kind of genetic modification. And it's like I saw this movie in '97 when it first came out in the theater because I've always been a big Ethan Hawke fan ever since Explorers, dude. I mean, I've just been like, that's my guy, and he's a solid actor. And I looked at this movie and I just thought to myself, okay, so it's a real sci-fi. It's not Star Wars. Star Wars is barely science fiction. It's really more fantasy. Mm-hmm. This movie is more Philip K. Dick, more thinking man sci-fi. I mean, Star Trek barely scratches the surface of science fiction. This is real sci-fi. Gattaca is a real thinking man sci-fi. It's indicative, I think, of Philip K. Dick, Ray Bradbury. But it's like, I loved the movie when it first came out, and I just thought to myself, wow, this is a terrifying future if we go in this direction. And it kind of stuck out to me from the standpoint of visuals because it was the first sci-fi that we had seen that didn't look like Blade Runner. The movie is very clean. It's kind of got a 1930s and almost the cars are from the 60s. And then it had some unusual aspects of it where there weren't any spaceships. There were rockets. Right. And no shuttle, fancy CGI or anything like that. Movie had a $34 million budget, which in 1997 is not peanuts. Right. And it's got this huge cast, which is probably where a lot of the money went. You've got Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman, Jude Law, Ernest Borgnine, Gore Vidal, Alan Arkin, Tony Shalhoub. This is the first time I had ever seen Jude Law. And I was really impressed. And this is also, anecdotally, this is the first time that Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman ever met. They met on set and they fell in love in real life during Gattaca. And there's a lot of on-screen chemistry that you can see. It's very obvious. Uma's just gorgeous. It's just unreal. Still beautiful after all these years. That Norse blood. Or she's Swedish or something. But so after this, they got married and had some kids. Now they're divorced because I think he slept with the help, as I recall, the babysitter.
He pulled a Schwarzenegger
governorship.
Yeah. I mean, But anyway, this Wikipedia has it as American dystopian science fiction, written directed by Andrew Nicole in his filmmaking debut. The film presents a biopunk vision of a future society driven by eugenics, where potential children are conceived through genetic selection to ensure they possess the best hereditary traits of their parents. And in the movie, they first have their first son, who's just naturally, the second son they have genetically altered. And they say, we're picking the very best of you. Humans have already enough problems built in. So we're just going to pick the very best of you. So no heart disease, no myopia, no hair loss, not prone to any diseases. You have the utmost physical advantage.
So someone like me, basically.
Right. So the film centers around Vincent, played by Ethan Hawke, who's conceived outside of eugenics program and struggles to overcome genetic discrimination to realize his dream of going into space. This guy's got basically a 90% chance of having a heart attack before he's 30. And it says the film draws on our concerns over reproductive technologies that facilitate eugenics and the possible consequences of such technological developments for society. It also explores the idea of destiny in the ways in which it can and does govern lives. Characters in Gattaca continually battle with both society and themselves to find their place in the world and who they are destined to become according to their genes. And I just think to myself, you know, we cracked the DNA code, the human genome. We've already been talking about picking sex. I know we're going towards filtering out things like asthma and Crohn's disease. I mean, anything that you're prone
look what
for.
they do with Down syndrome, you know.
That too, you know, you'd have basically no Down syndrome babies if this was a future. You know, and then you've got these two classes of people, one of which basically are the worldwide janitors. In the movie, that's kind of all the work that he can find. His dad tells him the only way you're going to get to see the inside of a spaceship is if you're cleaning it.
Right.
You know, meanwhile, his brother is the genetically altered one and has all the advantages and grows taller and bigger and, you know, is much more of a physical force. But when they go to play Blood Brothers, Ethan Hawke's character cuts his finger and he says there was something very different flowing through my veins, because Vincent almost passes out. He doesn't cut his finger. He's scared. He's apprehensive. So there's this.
If one guy drowns, he saves him twice, right?
Saves him twice, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because they would compete when their parents weren't watching. So there's so many things. You know, I've always found this movie to be really beautifully shot. I love the colors. It's got all these great sepia tones and greens.
It has a film noir look to it.
It does. It does. It's got great shadows.
Right.
The music is beautiful. It's gorgeous. Great score. You know, they spent $36 million. They made 12. So it was critically acclaimed. Everybody loved it.
Right.
But and as I recall, Christian, it didn't get a whole lot of. It was only playing in one theater in my town, and it was a small theater. It was kind of an art house theater at the time in Scottsdale. So I think to myself, did this get a lot of theatrical release, or was it sort of one of these movies that they kind of shelved because they didn't quite figure out how to maybe market it? Because it's sort of a tough. It's not easy to market.
It's tough to market. I feel like science fiction often will struggle. The last Blade Runner movie, which was pretty good, and it really kind of an organic sequel to the original. It bombed at theaters. I think Blade Runner itself may have done poorly in theaters as well.
It did. It bombed. It bombed. It got its life through VHS and home rental.
Yeah. So I think that maybe sci-fi is more niche than we realize. But the movie endures. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, I mean, we get all these different offshoots, and you mentioned sort of the tangents that we go on. But it's the movie's had a good afterlife. It's actually on Hulu right now if you're a subscriber, by the way, so you can check it out there. But I just remember it being kind of a blip on the box office radar, and that's a shame.
Yeah. I remember the movie posters. It had a picture of Ethan and then a picture of cells, and it said his cell, and it's like the prisoner. It says prisoner, right, and then his cell, and it's just. I love the movie posters. I wish they had done some kind of illustration, but from the standpoint of marketing, I thought that was genius. But we were really the 90s. It's funny because there's an alternate ending to this movie which they did not show, and it's really interesting because
I don't think I ever saw the alternate.
It's basically it's a crawl at the end, and it says, in a few short years, scientists will have completed the Human Genome Project, the mapping of all the genes that make up the human being. We have now evolved to the point where we can direct our own evolution. And then it says, had we acquired this knowledge sooner, the following people may never have been born. And they basically do a little vignette of pictures. You've got Abraham Lincoln, Marfan syndrome. You've got who's this?
Better have Andre the Giant in there.
Emily Dickinson, manic depression. I didn't know this about these people. Van Gogh, epilepsy.
Right.
I didn't know that about Van Gogh. I had
You're
no
also
idea.
schizophrenic too.
Yeah, I mean, drinking all that absinthe doesn't help. Albert Einstein, dyslexia.
Probably didn't help either.
I didn't know Einstein had dyslexia. John F. Kennedy, I knew he had Addison's disease. That's kind of an obvious one. Is that Rita Hayworth, Alzheimer's?
Yep.
Ray Charles, primary glaucoma. But then it just starts to. I mean, I was born with asthma. I probably wouldn't make the cut in that world. There's no way. Stephen Hawking, that's sort of an obvious one. Right. Jackie Joyner Kersee, asthma. I didn't know that. Olympian. So then it says, of course, the other birth that may never have taken place is might be your own. Right. They thought that this didn't. I guess it didn't go over well with test audiences, so they decided to take it out. I don't think you really need it because the movie basically just drives it home really hard. But I just see so many parallels with this movie and the direction we're going with COVID and vaccines and all this stuff. And it's like this kid who's been barred from taking courses online. He's the first casualty. He's the first Vincent. He's the first invalid, essentially.
Well, look at last Sunday. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I mentioned the Emmys and the Met Gala. I mean, two perfect examples of the help with their masks, holding the dresses of these famous people and the celebrities and their helpers. I mean, I don't know how we just collectively are not revolting at the situation and rebelling in some significant fashion. It's so in your face now that it doesn't matter whether I'm conservative or liberal. How does that not register? But it doesn't seem to be. We're just shrugging your shoulders at this point.
And Brian, don't you think that it's weird? There are lessons that we can find throughout, even in pop culture, if you'll look for them. Like, one of the reasons that pop music sucks so bad is that it's like these guys who are marginally talented musicians, and they just shove them in a room and they sort of force a thing out. And they can't tour. They can't make any, like, everything comes out sounding forced because it is forced. And then you have like the Brian Jonestown Massacre, for example, a band I really love. And you've got a guy, in Anton, who's a complete disaster. Dig is the best documentary that's ever been made for anyone who's never seen it. But, the guy is just an absolute disaster. And then he writes that album, Thank God for Mental Illness, in like one day, and plays every freaking instrument on, like,
he's like a savant. Anton is kind of a savant.
Totally. He is. Yeah. And I've seen him live like 5 times, and the live, like, he's incredible. He is the mess. Like, I've seen him once. They kicked him off in Tucson because it was 2 a.m. He kept playing. Yeah, and he's so good. And there's something about all of those kind of warts and imperfections, and in Anton's case, probably some kind of mental illness.
He's like this generation's Brian Wilson in a way.
That's his whole Brian Jonestown Massacre.
Brian didn't even know what Brian's problem was. I mean, the drugs didn't help things, but the guy was. I don't know if he's manic or if he was bipolar, but
I think he has schizophrenia, and I think what happened was he became an acid casualty because he took LSD and then it exacerbated. The same way, one of my heroes, Sid Barrett from Pink Floyd, they think, a lot of psychiatrists go back thinking that all that creativity he had before LSD was probably a little bit of schizophrenic to begin with, and then he took a lot of LSD and it just exacerbated it to the point that couldn't even perform.
But I mean, even guys like Zappa, who were basically teetotalers. I mean, I don't think Zappa drank. I know he smoked like a chimney.
No, he did not drink. You had to be straight. Well, you literally, to play Zappa's music, you have to be straight sober. Yeah. I mean, he even had that rule for his band. There's no drugs in the band.
Yeah. You get a bus ticket if you got caught with drugs or if you got caught high. They'd say he'd go to the tour manager and he'd say, give that guy a ticket, and they'd go and they'd say, do you want an aisle seat or a window?
Yeah.
But it's like Terry Bozzio, Steve Vai, talk to anybody. They're just like, you had to be on your game. Frank practiced like 8 hours a day. It was very much a job.
It was.
He was like the manager.
And what kills me is that music was so complicated. You have to be so sober to the subtle changes are so quick. But, you know, Braxton, back to what you're saying about the music industry, you look at like, say Beyonce, and then you go look at her credits. There's like there's one album, I forget what some Lemonade thing. She had like 25 writers on it.
Yeah.
You know, 25 writers. And then you look at the last 4 Bowie albums and there's one writer, David Bowie.
Well, I mean, Beyonce's solo stuff, I don't think it's ever been as good as Destiny's Child. I thought that band was genius, and they all filled a very needed role. And the sum of the parts made that a much bigger thing, even though she was obviously sort of like the lead.
Right.
But just from the standpoint of the music, that stuff kind of harkened back to Motown to me a little bit more, which is the stuff that I like. I like that Stax stuff in the Motown. It's genius. It's timeless, essentially. But you know, I agree with you, Braxton. You know, you look at some of the best bands, and there's always friction there, whether it's the Who or whether it's Jane's Addiction. Right. And out of that comes beautiful art. Out of that chaos can come iconic stuff, iconic albums, iconic art, iconic storytelling. Blade Runner. I mean, you want to talk about a shoot that was just marred with problems and friction, and you know, it was Harrison Ford called it 48 days of night, because he was just working nights. They shot at night, every night, in the rain, with smoke, bees smoke they brought onto the set to get all that thick. I mean, you'd be choking. People were getting sick on the set because of the smoke. But you know, Ridley likes his smoke. He was smoking outside one time. One of the guys said, "Ridley, do you have smoke in your house?" And he's like, "Oh, you know, it's good effect, but you know, no, I don't." You know, but it's like, out of all that chaos comes this beautiful film. I mean, the actors didn't get along. The American crew didn't like Ridley. Ridley didn't like them. It was the first time he had ever shot in America. Lots of problems. The investors were breathing down his neck, saying, "Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, get done." So it's like, but out of that comes these beautiful pieces of art. And I just think to myself, you know, in the movie, you know, even the ones that are the chosen ones, whether it's Jude Law, who has all the advantages, he has money, he has this physical quality. He's an Olympic winning swimmer, and his story is that he steps out in front of a bus one day, completely sober. He's just miserable with his life. He's got all these advantages. He has everything. He's got a heart like a horse. Right. He can do anything, and yet he chooses to off himself. He survives, ends up in the wheelchair, and that's how he finds Ethan Hawke finds him, and Ethan Hawke takes on his identity as a quote unquote borrowed ladder, right, in order to access the elite society within this new world at Gattaca and become a navigator on his way to Titan.
Even towards the end, like when you see Ethan finally making it, and Jude Law can't even like bask in the glow of his success, like helping him, because then he sets himself on fire.
Well, Jude Law just says to him at one point, I can't believe that you've done this. I don't know how you did this.
Right.
Because I mean, ultimately Jude Law's at home and he's taking his fingernails and his hair and his skin and blood and urine and giving it to Ethan to go out into the world with. But Ethan, ultimately, his character, Vincent, he's got to do all the work. Right. He's got to go out there and make this happen. So it's like his character is like sort of the ultimate in overcoming adversity. And I think to myself, who are we without those struggles and without those defects? There's even that Star Trek that Shatner directed, The Final Frontier. Not a great movie, but the theme among it was, who am I without my pain?
Right.
What's wrong with having asthma or depression? I mean, Winston Churchill was a manic depressant,
right?
You know, yeah. Oftentimes these things, turns us into a certain type of caliber of men through adversity and overcoming it, and then that develops character. And I just think to myself, the chosen few in Gattaca, these ones that are all perfect, what kind of character do they have? Who are these people? And we don't really get into that in the movie, but from what we see, I've always noticed this about this movie, and you guys tell me if you saw the same thing. The one element among the Gattaca crew, all of the chosen ones, is they're very cold. Right. And they're very quiet, and they're very sort of manicured and beautiful, and they're
plastic almost.
Yeah, yeah, and then the workers, Ernest Borgnine, obviously, and Ethan, you know, when he's the janitor, and they're all sort of like cleaning up after everybody.
Yeah.
They seem to be more sort of the interesting crowd,
Right?
Because they're sort of unvarnished and jagged and not so polished and perfect.
There's a great line. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Terry Pratchett. He has a book series called Discworld, and there's a line in the book Going Postal. It says, "I may always be the underdog, but the underdog always knows where's to fasten his teeth. You know, he knows where the soft spot is to latch onto somebody." And I think that says a lot. I think that people that struggle, that work hard, that you know, actually achieve something, I think that it's more rewarding, it's more deserving, and it's more character driven, you know, in real life and in fiction. You know, I think that's, you look at, you go back to Marvel Comics, you look at someone like, say, Matt Murdock, you know, blind guy, then overcomes it and gets these amazing senses. Or you have someone
becomes Daredevil.
Right. And then you have someone like Ben Grimm, who becomes the Thing, who's a super strong guy, and he jokes around a lot, but he masks his pain. There's a lot of pathos.
Because he's a walking rock.
Right, right.
You know, I mean, yeah. And he used to be like a handsome dude with a fiance, and then damn those cosmic rays. You know, yeah, but he finds like a higher purpose. So
he really does. And then you look at the characters that they create now; they're all perfect. They're all Mary Sue's. They're all very plastic. You know, like
there's no journey.
Right. Yeah. There's nothing. It's the art of storytelling is lost on Generation Z, and that it's not there. And
that's one of the reasons why the payoffs in movies, especially third acts, are always disappointing. Because they don't know how to set up to have a big, satisfying payoff. Right. And that's these opening acts, they know how to do that. Second act, third act, it's just fucking oatmeal, dude. It's just nothing. So
I mean, would you rather be Henry VIII or Odysseus? You know, I mean,
yeah, that's great. It's a very good analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. You know, Christian, you had never seen Gattaca. And I assume you probably watched it last night or today. What's just from a standpoint? I'm just curious. You know, Siskel actually liked this movie. Siskel and Ebert had nice things to say about it, which was the bar you kind of had to clear back in the 80s and the 90s. I have no idea what Rex Reed said, even though he's probably my favorite movie reviewer of all time. But, what did you think of this? You know, I mean, it's, you know, you're looking back at a movie that's kind of dated now, and yet I look at some things that sort of struck me was the electric cars everywhere, and you know, and the sound, and then there's no shuttle; it's all rockets. And now we don't have a shuttle; we're all back to rockets. You got Elon, you got Jeff Bezos. Everything is, you know, largely kind of based on the Redstone and the Atlas rockets of the '60s again. Right. So those things sort of stuck out to me. You know, not having seen it since probably the 90s.
I feel like a lot of sci-fi, maybe 80s and 90s in general, had a cheap look to it. Even Total Recall, which is excellent in many ways, just didn't have that sort of just the look of it felt like you can tell they made it for the movie. And this had a very lived in, clean, sublime feel to it. And it's one of the things I liked about it. It has a lot of different sort of textures to it as far as the story, you know, and for everyone saying like they keep remaking properties and it's a new TV show based on X, this would actually make a great TV show, because I think you can get into a lot of the themes that are just suggested here. And one thing maybe it's a flaw in the story, but, you know, Jude Law's character got the silver and was upset about that. But if everyone is biologically superior, then I would think there'd be great competition there. There'd be actually no, you know, it wouldn't be bad to come in second because the guy and gal next to you is biologically enhanced as well. So I just, that was a little aside, but yeah.
Well, that was the interesting about the Uma Thurman, because she's a genetically designed baby, and she has a heart problem kind of similar to Vincent's character, not quite as bad, but she's still, so there's still some things I guess that kind of happen in this, you know, and it's the same with Anton. You know, he's taller, he's bigger, he's more handsome than Vincent, you know, his little brother. But at the same time, he doesn't quite have the endurance. You know, it's that the best line in this movie is when they finally face off at the end and they go for a swim. The feuding brothers in this I love, because the flip side to that is that Ethan left his family and he left his brother, but he gained a new brother in Jude Law's character. I mean, they are closer than anything that Vincent and Anton could ever hope to be. But, there's that scene where he's like, they're starting to fight again like brothers. In one stance, it starts off, I've got to take you in. You're a trespasser here. And then it's like, you can't tell me,
doesn't he?
Well, he says, you can't tell me what to do. And he's like, you've got to tell me something I can't do all these years later. He's like, but I beat you one time. He's like, and then he's like, you didn't beat me. I beat myself that day. And then he's, you want me to prove it to you? I'll prove it to you. And Ethan's like, I do. And then they go out and they go swimming. Same thing happens. Anton basically cramps up and he says, how did you do this? How did you do this, Vincent? And he says, Ethan's just got this great line, which like it's stuck with me all these years. He says, that's the difference between you and me, Anton. I never saved anything for the swim back.
Right.
Every day he is pushing it 150%. In fact, that's what Tony Shalhoub said to him. He says, Ethan says, I'll give 100%. Tony Shalhoub says, that'll get you halfway there.
Right.
And that's life.
Hey guys, I got to go get a plug for my computer. I'll be back 1 second.
All right, no problem.
Well, I look at that movie as like the spark of the divine in all of us, that people that are given everything, that have every opportunity in life, don't necessarily make the best choices. I mean,
look at Hunter Biden. I mean,
perfect
that's
example.
Perfect example. Yeah.
And then you have someone like my dad who didn't know his father, never met him once for 5 seconds, grew up poor, was able to go to school, for 4 years, get a degree. He ended up becoming a superintendent. He's retired now, but I mean, that guy struggled like nobody's business, and I think that it creates character, but it also, what you get is so much more rewarding. I think the problem with today is we live in a instant society where
instant gratification. Yeah.
Right. It's and whether it's physical things like something from Amazon, or whether it's
likes or retweets.
Perfect. I mean, that's a perfect example. Like, that's the society we live in now, that there's no real sense of accomplishment. There's no
struggle, I suppose, even though there's probably a lot of people that would argue with me about that.
No,
given the pigment of my skin.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm talking real struggle, and like I always said, I think that everybody's missing the boat here in America. Yes, there is some type of oppression in America, but it has nothing to do with skin color or gender or sexual preference or transphobia or anything like that. It has to do with class. It's a class struggle. And that's what it always has come down to. It always seems, sadly, it might always will come down to that, But that's
my dad always likes to quote the movie Shooter, which is a good movie with Marky Mark. Ned Beatty has the line at the end where he says, it comes down to two things. There's no Democrats, there's no Republicans. There's the haves and the have-nots. Yes. And these elites that want this global reset and depopulation. This is all about, just basically attaining more and more and more and having more power. That's kind of how I see it with the good old multinational elites that have sold this country out. But Christian, I love the visuals of the movie. That's the one thing that kind of stuck out to me when I first saw it. I never seen colors quite like that. Steven Soderbergh kind of does a lot of and just basically kind of branding each scene with a different color, but reusing it over and over again, and kind of the symbolism and stuff as far as that's concerned. But I love the story, especially at the end, because I remember when I saw this, I think I was 21, and a lot of the there's also sort of a coming of age sort of narrative in this movie where Vincent is like every kid in every town trying to break out and get out and move away and do something awesome, achieve his dreams. And at the time I was 21, going to school, and I was getting ready to break out. Like, I wanted to go and leave, go to Chicago, work, do things, have a life. It kind of harkens back to Luke Skywalker staring at the two sons. That's everybody, like in their early 20s, not everybody, but it certainly was our generation, move out and start a life. And it's like a quest, you're a knight you know, but like that spoke to me as well. And I love the line at the end where he says, you know, when you're, you know, for somebody who never felt like he belonged in this world, I'm having an awfully hard time leaving it. It's always that thing where you work so hard to get away, and then you find some reason to stay.
That's a great line.
And then it's like, but he says, but they say that every cell in our DNA is part of a star. So maybe I'm going home. Such a beautiful arc. Yeah. And he finally makes it by way of a guy who's taking piss tests at the end to identify if they're actually the right people. He's got a son who's got some problems, and he knows that Vincent is a borrowed ladder, but he's just kind of like, how can I deny this guy? Yeah. How can I deny him after all this time?
He said, my son will look up to you, you know, and, you know, it'll set a precedent that you can. So he lets him go because of that. It's a nice touch to it.
Well, it makes me think, you know, when he comes back, would he sort of reveal who he was, or would he continue to live as the Jerome Morrow person? I don't know, because he could come back and say, hey, I'm Vincent, and I beat the system, and I blew every, you know, every single fucking metric out of the water. And, you know, Titan's great this time of year, by the way.
Yeah.
Braxton, what did you think? I mean, I don't get the sense that you're necessarily into sci-fi, but I could be wrong.
No, you're right. I tease people on Twitter about sci-fi all the time. You know, I'm happy when people like stuff, so I just tease. But
sure.
You know, I'm not trying to like plug my book here, but it's just that it's hard not to find.
That's part of the reason why we do this. So plug away, dude.
Capitalism is awesome. Plug.
Yeah.
You know, so my my uncle played for the Royals. My dad was a great baseball player. You know, had all these.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that like all these natural abilities and stuff. And I was kind of a middling athlete in high school. I was like an okay athlete, but I was never a great athlete or anything. Joined the military, get busted up pretty good. And, you know, I was riding bulls and doing all this kind of, thank you, sir. And, you know, doing all the kind of Western cowboy stuff, riding bulls, chasing girls, drinking too many Coors and chewing Copenhagen, that kind of stuff. And, you know, then I go over to Iraq and get banged up pretty good. And what I found, especially actually during the writing process, because I think that's the most, like when you write, I think if you're doing it, you like Hemingway always said his goal was to write one true sentence. And especially if you're writing a kind of a memoir, that's what you want. That's really should be your goal every time you sit down and, you know, start putting pen to paper. So as I'm, you know, listening to this and watching the shows or the show, it's hard not to see that parallel where for me, I go over there, get wounded. They say you're never going to walk again and all of that. And, you know, the struggle that was that recovery process, the thing that came out of that struggle that was the recovery process was a different person than I could have ever been otherwise. I mean, I'm not saying I'm, you know, I'm nobody's role model, but, or I shouldn't be anyway, but I'm definitely a better person than I ever would have been. Like right now I'm sitting here talking to, you know, Brian Urso and Christian Toto, and I'm an idiot horse trainer in Idaho. Like none of this happens, you know, if a suicide bomber doesn't decide to blow himself up in front of me, you know.
That's something really strange to kind of justify internally. Well, I would imagine, but at the same time, I'm really happy you're here either way.
Not to get religious, but you ever think that maybe we're given these challenges? I mean, I don't know if any of you guys are Christian. I'm Catholic, and a lot of times I think that we're given these struggles in life to overcome, to make us better people, you know, and
to grow,
right, to grow, and there's that phrase, "Your cross to bear," and Braxton, your cross to bear was. I could never survive that. You know, I always think of what soldiers do. I would have been 4F. I never would have got picked.
Same here.
Right. But I look what he overcame. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And it's almost like that's your cross. And you've achieved something because of that. You know, and I think that that people like you are more interesting to talk to than say Paris Hilton. You know, it's there's a difference. I mean, I'd rather talk to someone, you know, like you, a rancher. I mean, you do all this. I've never ridden a horse. I'd love to ride a horse, you know. And
I can make that happen.
Yeah,
love it. Yeah,
yeah. But I think, but when you have a cross to bear, when you have a struggle in life, like you said, would this been achieved if I didn't have the attack? I think it would have, but it's probably would have taken a different way, because I think that's the type of person you are. You know, I think that we're given these challenges to see what makes us as a person. But
yeah, I mean, growth is always uncomfortable, and I always kind of have to remind myself when I'm uncomfortable that maybe I'm growing. You know, hopefully something good is coming out of this, and I'm expanding, because fear is just sort of like doing a Google search and nothing coming up to a large degree. It's just sort of more fear of the unknown, I suppose, or what's not comfortable. You know, but it's, I also believe that God doesn't put challenges in front of us that he doesn't know for certain that we can overcome. Right. I don't think he ever puts too much weight on us, just enough to grow and expand and become better people. And in that sense, I've always kind of felt like maybe all of our stories are kind of written. And there's a certain amount of comfort in that God has a plan, even though one of my favorite jokes is, how do you make God laugh? Make a plan. Sort of movie Kicking and Screaming, Eric Stoltz. Yeah. I always kind of have to remind myself of that when I think about the left, you know, and the multinational elites and the Great Reset. I think to myself, okay, they have a plan, right, and that's definitely going to make God laugh. So we'll see how things shake out. But I agree. I just think that that's the other thing that I did. It's interesting, when I tried to find some extras on this movie, interviews, deleted scenes, there's nothing, and it's because it had such a bad showing when it came out. There's no real junkets or anything. There's some audio commentary on a Blu-ray from the director, which I'd be curious to listen to, because I'm that kind of film geek. But there's a lot of religious symbolism in Gattaca. You have rosaries. You have Ethan, once he has his legs sawed off and he's made taller, he's in the Christ pose on the floor. They call the children that are born naturally God children. They even have on the IDs, on the valids, there's an infinity symbol, and on the invalids, there's a cross.
Right.
So there's all these religious overtones, which obviously, and I have no idea what Nicoli's politics are, but it's definitely an anti-eugenics film.
Right.
Very much so. And it's very pro, I don't want to say it's a Christian film necessarily, but I definitely see a lot of Christian overtones in the film.
A good point about the Down syndrome thing. Like, I know that with that ruling a couple weeks ago in Texas, there's this doctor that did a Twitter post that was horrific, talking about, well, now, you know, Down's kids can be aborted, you know, and it broke my heart reading that, because it was like, hold on.
That's Emma Peel. It's his dog.
It broke my heart, because it's like, I used to work for Special Olympics. I used to volunteer for them, and it's like invalidating all their hard work that they do. And I think that's like the double-edged sword with Gattaca, with the gene splicing. Do you want to make the perfect person, or do you want to let nature take its natural? There's a reason why they call it playing God, because sometimes I think you make more monsters that way than you do the perfect man.
Yeah, it's like Island of Dr. Moreau.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that's what I immediately thought of, because, you know, you have this guy on Twitter saying these horrific comments about, well, in 6 weeks you can know if they're Down syndrome, you can abort them. I'm like, dude, that's an awful. It's invalidating all their hard work. And
yeah, there's like the Special Olympics, the Paralympics. I mean,
right.
none of these things would exist. None of these people would exist. I've been convinced for years that the Down syndrome folks is God's way of teaching us to be humble and grateful and compassionate and empathetic. Right. Because whenever you see one of those kids, you know, and especially when they smile at you, I mean, right. it just lights you up like nothing.
I haven't met one yet that's been mean. They've always been
they're very sweet.
You know, and
a lot of them are funny.
Well, absolutely. And you know what's funny is it makes you question who's the one with the disability, them who try to love everybody and be kind to everybody, or us that can be such nasty people, you know? So it begs the question, you know.
And when they're joyous in a way that the rest of us aren't. It's kind of this unbridled, you know. I mean, it's just beautiful. Like one time, my wife's has a couple of Down syndrome people in her family, and there's this girl whose name's Lauren, and we were at a family reunion at this lake, and we were out on paddle boards, and she was on the paddle board with me, and we paddle out to the middle of the lake. Of course, she's got a life vest on and all this, and she says, "Push me off," and I said, "Absolutely not." She's like, "Shove me in the water," and I said, "No." And then she just kept, you know, she's getting like frustrated, and I pushed her off. And, you know, the splash, she comes out, and the smile on her face is like, I mean, I still think about that sometimes, you know, just that, you know, flashbulb memory, I guess, is what it would be. But yeah, I mean, it's just a totally different level of, you know, gosh, it's hard to, just joy is the only word I can think of.
It's accomplishment. Like I look at, like I got my degree in '97 in occupational therapy, and the first day they taught us, you put the disease last and you put the person first. And like in the case of your wife's, you know, relative, you would focus on her, you know, just enjoying life and struggling hard, you know, and accomplishing something. And today, I think we do the exact opposite. We're regressing again, because now we're focusing on, well, this person has this disease. This person, it's not, like even, you know, on Twitter, people put like what they're suffering from. You know, I don't understand why you do that. I mean, that shouldn't.
Meanwhile, Norm Macdonald lives with cancer for 9 years, and not a fucking soul knows about it.
Right.
And I've watched Norm's face go through some different machinations over the years, and I've always figured that it's got to be some kind of steroids.
Right.
I don't know what he's on. I don't know what's wrong with him, but something's going on, and he's fighting it.
Yeah.
And even he made jokes. He's like, he said something like, "My head might be giant and deformed now, but he used to make fun of Tarantino like that. He'd do his Tarantino impression on Saturday Night Live. Like, yeah, my head, it's just giant. It's completely deformed, But like Norm is, Bill Maher said, we need more people like that. But it gets back to the, what I call the victim chic mentality within the culture. It's, we don't celebrate winners anymore. We celebrate losers and victims, and poor you. And in the 80s and 90s, we wanted to be like Mike, literally. I wanted to, and I still do. I want to perform at that level in my occupation.
Right.
I had I been 6'4", I would have been a mean power forward, but I'm not. But I've got different abilities than Mike, but I can still kick ass in my own way. So
when you talk about the Special Olympics, I see when I worked there, some of those athletes, man, the way they train, I was like, I could never do the stuff they do. It's insane, the amount of work they put into it,
Yeah.
And then to be on top of that, they have Down syndrome. So it's amazing. And I think that, harken back to, we said with Norm Macdonald, David Bowie was the same way. Nobody knew he had cancer until he died.
Right.
And he accomplished so much in the last 5 years of his life, music wise. And it's like, that's the way to go out. Go out like a man, go out with, I always like that phrase, die with your boots on, because it just, you either, you can die on your knees or you can die with your boots on. And that, people like Bowie or people like Norm Macdonald, that they did, because they did it on their terms. They didn't ask for sympathy. They didn't announce it to everybody. It just, I think there's something about character.
Well, it's their own personal battle. It's nobody else's.
Absolutely.
Probably close friends and family know about it, and they're there to support him. And outside of that, who really needs to know?
Nobody needs to know.
Unless you're just this narcissist that needs this constant validation. And that's what I see going on with the culture today, where it's just all about me, and what's wrong with me, and how much I suffer, and how much, I struggle. And I just think to myself, who cares?
Right.
Really. I just think that's an attitude that comes from the 80s and the 90s. And that wasn't a controversial reaction in 1995 or 1997. People would call, you dub those people whiners, don't be a whiner. Nobody likes to listen to people whine. I don't care what's wrong with you. Overcome it and show me something of merit. You know, otherwise, you know, it's you remember we all used to say TMI?
Yes.
Too much information, you know? I mean, Jesus, all of social media is fucking TMI.
It really is. It's created a narcissistic society. And it's almost like, did Andy Warhol predict this when he said everybody will be famous in the future for 15 minutes? In a way, he was right, because it's come true, because people do become famous for about half a day for something they said on the internet, you know. And then
he meant, though, you actually earn it. You earn.
I think that's what he meant,
because you had to back then. You had to actually do something significant to earn that limelight. And you know, it's interesting. I just thought of this. There was no social media in Gattaca. I mean, what, you know, and there probably wouldn't be, but like, you know, because it's such a closed down, kind of controlled society to a large degree. But at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, that would have been an interesting wrinkle to throw into the movie. Braxton, did you like the movie?
I mean, sure. I mean, I appreciate the kind of undertones, and I think eugenics is awful. So I like anybody that pushes back on eugenics. So, I mean, sure.
Yeah.
It's just maybe sci-fi is not really.
Totally.
Like, I just talk about why The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is the best Western of all time.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. I just think to myself, when it comes to like storytelling, I don't understand why conservatives and especially libertarians don't like Gattaca more. Because there's so many conservative and right of center and libertarian overtones within the movie. And it's the same with Dallas Buyers Club. Total right of center libertarian movie on so many levels. And they get caught up in the, ooh, trans and ooh, homos. And, you know, I don't want to, you know, I'm not going to be caught dead promoting that movie, even though it's pushing a message of which your fundamental beliefs are rooted in.
That's my problem with, I'm a moderate Republican, I always say. Being in the music industry, I've worked with gay people, trans people my whole life. So I have no problem with what you do behind your door. I don't care.
Yeah, I don't care either, as long as you show up on time and turn in great work.
Right. And I think there's this faction of the Republican Party, the ultra conservative, that really needs to get out of the Stone Age. And I think I think they would win more elections that way. You know, like people get mad at Trump. Like, dude, Trump was the first president that came in support of gay marriage ever.
Yeah.
I mean, Obama only did it.
President ever.
Yeah.
Right. And Obama only did it during his second term going in because he wanted the votes.
Yeah. I mean, he got elected by not believing in gay marriage.
Right.
People forget that. That was his position in 2008. And then by the time it was time for re-election, you know, that was one of the 180s that he had done. So he evolved. He must have evolved.
Right.
I'm sorry, Brian.
Go ahead. You go ahead. I was listening to you. Go ahead.
Don't you think it's weird how Hollywood always tries to write in the kind of conservative libertarian dad as this guy, like he's supposed to be this made fun of character, but then he ends up being the favorite of everybody?
That's Archie Bunker. That's Alex P. Keaton. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What's his name? The libertarian guy from gosh darn it, I'm trying to think of that television series name right now. The guy who said it's Ron Swanson.
Yeah.
You know, Ron Swanson is supposed to be this kind of heel of all of these jokes, and then he ends up like everyone's favorite guy. I think it's funny because they kind of nail the conservative libertarian dad guy, and people love that person, and yet they continue to. Hank Hill is another example of this. Like, they try to make him be this, kind of whipping post, and everybody loves him. It's funny.
Even Ed Bundy, as twisted as Married with Children was, he went to work every day, provided for his family, and he just wanted to kind of be left alone, to enjoy. What's that?
It's funny you said Alex P. No, go ahead, Tristan. You go ahead.
I'll say with his hand in his pants. But Alex P. Keaton actually was written as the secondary character. It was the hippie parents that were meant to be the heroes.
That's right.
But then everyone reacted to Alex P. Keaton, and they had to kind of retool the show and like make him the star. So
yeah. When you, I've rewatched Family Ties was something that was on every week. We watched it as a family because it usually came on in and around dinner time, and we had all these shows that we would watch as a family: the Must See TV, Cosby Show, Cheers. and Family Ties was one that my stepmom just would never miss. And you watch that. I've rewatched them, and they're such good writing. And they have this tiny little 22 minutes that they have to cram everything into, and they do it so perfectly. Right. The first season's very different. Alex is a Nixon guy in the first season, and then obviously once Reagan comes around, you know, that's part of what propelled that character was just the people liked Ronald Reagan, you know, and even a lot of Democrats liked Ronald Reagan, and also the America that he ended up kind of helping to create. But Archie Bunker was the same way. They never wrote that show originally for him to become this kind of American icon, but through I think it's the same element with Alex. It's the magic of the actor combined with the character and the timing. It's just a zeitgeist, and you're able to catch lightning in a bottle, once in a while.
In my house growing up, until I moved out and graduated college, my parents called me Alex P. Keaton, because my parents are both. My dad's like a normal Democrat, which is like rare now. And my mother's a little bit left to him, and then my sister, I love to death. She's really out there left. So, I don't agree with them on probably anything, and but I was the oddball out, and people are like, they always say it's because you grew up when we moved when you were 14, we moved in an affluent neighborhood, and I'm like, that's not it, because when I remember in second grade, it was 1980. We had an election in school. Who would you vote for, Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan? Well, I remember hearing every day my parents bitch about Carter, so I voted for Ronald Reagan. It made more sense. Why are you going to vote for the same guy again if you're complaining about him all the time? That was my reasoning then. And then through the years, I started to become more and more, Republicans. That's why I became the Alex P. Keaton of the family, So.
I've always said, I think APK had a huge influence on my future politics.
Yeah.
That show was, it was just brilliantly written and conceived. And I think, reflected the culture pretty accurately at the time, because as much as everyone disagreed, whether it's the hippie parents and Alex or even the sisters, they all loved and respected each other at the end of the day. Absolutely. And at the end of the show, because they're family. And I've talked about this on this show before, but this is something that Roseanne was very much tapping into with her reboots. When I watched it, I didn't really see so much of the old Roseanne show. I saw kind of a new angle from the standpoint of, we can all disagree about this stuff, but we love each other and we respect each other, and we're going to agree to disagree and do our own thing. And
that's what it was like in our house. Like, my sister is like not even close to where I am in politics wise, but we love each other to death, and morally we have the same morals, even though politically there's differences.
Different way to get there.
Right. There's a way
destination.
Yeah. And that's what, like, if I could take what happens in my family, like the way we can still exist and have no problems, and take that formula and throw it out in the world, because we used to be able to do that. We used to be able to disagree with people politically but respect the hell out of them. Sometimes even be friends with them. And now it seems like it's lost. It's so divided now. It's sad.
Yeah. I mean, it's splitting, we're balkanizing, I think along the lines of every single kind of facet, whether it's comedy, entertainment, and where you want to live. I was talking to my CPA the other day, and she said, how long do you think this COVID thing is going to last? And I said, I think it's all going to depend on where you live. Mm-hmm. Are you in a red state? Are you in a blue state? Are you in a purple state? It's going to be something that's going to be, I think, dependent on local issues, not so much what goes on in the far distant capital. But
it's definitely going to get at least through the midterms, though. Like, let's not kid ourselves, because mail-in ballots are going to be necessary in the midterms.
Oh.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean,
they're going to milk it. They're going to milk it.
But is that going to be only in blue states? Is that going to be something red states tighten down with? So far red states are tightening down on that shit. So I don't know. So I'm not looking at California. I'm not even taking that as a bellwether. So that state has been screwed up a long time. And the idea that, like, Larry Elder, even if he was elected, could turn that state around. Give me a break. You have a super majority of Democrats in Sacramento who's going to cut him off at every turn.
Right.
And it's just sort of like Mexico when Vicente Fox came into power. Everybody said, "Yay! It's a right of center guy. Ran Coca-Cola. He'll turn the whole country around." Yeah,
not so much.
you know, it's going to take decades to turn California around.
Yeah.
Decades, and it's going to have to get worse.
But
It's
the
going to have to get worse for
symbolism
those
of,
people.
I mean, I think you're right about that, but the symbolism of Elder winning would have been huge. It would have been absolutely enormous for
Absolutely.
the right nationwide.
But did they
So,
cheat? I mean, come on.
I mean, do they not cheat?
Do they
Definitely.
not cheat? So exactly.
Like,
So exactly. I
But
don't
it's
know
not,
how.
that's also kind of not new though. This is the weird thing. Like, sure, cheating with in the way that maybe it's being done now, and I'm not trying to get you kicked off YouTube here, so I don't know exactly how cheating is being done, but cheating has always been done, right? Like clear back, like since there's been elections, they would be giving out whiskey, like free shots as long as you vote for me. You know what I mean? Like cheating has always happened.
But isn't there? There's that margin of error, which is I don't know, 0.8% or something. It's a federal threshold for voter fraud, and if it exceeds a certain threshold, then you've got to have audits and you've got to look into it. And it's just like
we hold the rest of the world to that standard, but not us.
Well, I mean, the problem is that our voting system is based on the honor system, and the idea that Democrats are going to abide by something that's based on the honor system is just, I just don't see it happening.
Well, even if you take out if there was election fraud or not, like when it comes to the ballots, or whatever, there was fraud in the last election, even with Trump, because the media covered so much up for different people. Like you look at the Hunter Biden, now Politico is running stories, but it is real. Yeah, assholes. Last year at this time, you're saying it's fake. Yeah. It's a nothing burger, and so it's like, yes, there was a fraudulent election because we don't have an honest media. If we had an honest media, they would have said that. If that was Donald Trump Jr., the laptop, that would have been on everything,
Absolutely.
You couldn't be more right. I mean, that's the one thing that there is no debate over. It was a fraudulent election because the media was so corrupt, so crooked. And that story alone could have been the game changer. If they made that a day-by-day story, drip, 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 new headlines, new accusations. If we watched Biden, try to duck the headlines, duck the hard questions, it would have all just kind of coalesced into this, can't elect this guy, sorry. That's not what happens.
And then you get people that say, well, Hunter Biden was running for president. I said, that's not the point. Look his dad was helping him get these big deals, save 10% for the big guy. I mean, how do you think he got these contracts? I mean, and then he said, I didn't meet these people. Then there's pictures of him meeting these people.
Not because of the stick figures he draws, for sure. You remember Hemingway called critics the lice that crawl on literature? I think journalists are kind of the lice that crawl on culture. And like until we, get some ivermectin into our culture and get rid of these bot flies, we're kind of at a permanent disadvantage.
Yeah. I mean, I think
that's even soft pedaling it. I know many people who are good and kind and maybe left of center or liberal. They still believe the news coming into their iPhones. And until they doubt that, until we kind of diminish the journalist's ability to lie, I think we're screwed. I think that's a game changer at this point.
Well, I told my dad.
Michael Malice has I'm sorry to cut you off.
No. Go ahead.
Michael Malice has a great quote about that. He says something like, "You'll know that the battle is won when the average American views a journalist the same way that they view a tobacco executive." Something like that.
Yeah, I just saw that on Twitter. Yeah,
it's very good.
Yeah,
well, I know. Right. Like I told my dad, he goes, "We watch too much Fox." I go, I rarely watch Fox. What I do now is I vet my news. Like I'll go to this source and this source and this source, or I'll watch Tim Pool, who is not conservative at all, and he will break down, what actually happened. And I always tell him, why don't you go to these guys, on YouTube and watch? And he's like, oh, they're all conspiracy theories. I'm like, it's not conspiracy theory. I think it's not going to be our parents' generation it's going to have to be our generation or younger that's going to have to break the news cycle. I think that my parents' generation or two entrenched into believing the news, and there was lying even back during Cronkite, lied during the Vietnam War, I believe.
Sure.
So, I mean, I think that it's going to have to be our generation or younger, you know, that's going to have to break the news cycle and say, hey, I'm not buying any of this bullshit, you know?
Yeah.
The
Gen
bias
X.
is always there, but now it is so corrupt, so obvious that you now know if a major story breaks that would hurt the Democrats, that journalists across the country will work together to block it until the election is over. We now know that as a fact.
Right.
What could be more corrupt? There's nothing more corrupt than that. Nothing.
Well, you've even got Tucker the other night that didn't even talk about the Friday results from the Arizona audit.
Yeah, that was weird. I thought that was very weird.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, there was conclusive evidence of, I don't know, 50, 60,000 votes that are red flagged.
I think it's 55,000. I think.
Yeah, it's a big number.
A plurality of them came in after November 3rd, and they were all duplicates.
Yeah.
I mean, these were all legitimate red flags, and it's well beyond the margin of victory, you know, which I think Biden won Arizona by like 11,000 votes. It was very slim.
Yeah.
So it's been referred to our AG, you know, and again, I brought up that federal voter fraud election threshold. It's way beyond that 8% Arizona. So it's kind of like it demands a further investigation. Hopefully our AG, who I believe is running for governor. So that kind of puts some real pressure on him. But we've got way too many McCain conservatives in Arizona. And for whatever reason, Cindy McCain, who's loaded, wields a lot of power, whether it's Doug Ducey or, you know, some of these other characters, but they're all kind of this old guard, you know, and largely all boomers. And I just think it's time for like Gen X to step the fuck up. And because, you know, nobody's going to pass a torch to to our generation. We're going to have to wrestle it out of their cold, dead hands, basically. You know, if we want to actually have a future for ourselves, you know, and Social Security is basically like just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
So that's why I just like kind of like I look at DeSantis and I say, that's the guy. That's going to be the first Gen X president. You know, I mean, and he's probably going to be the type of guy who is going to anger a lot of small government Republicans. You know, Kristi Noem, you know, criticizes DeSantis because he's going after private businesses who mandate vaccines. And Kristi Noem says, well, that's too much government. That's too big. And I'm thinking, and I'm saying to myself, you don't understand the threat that we're under. You know, if you don't have this kind of offense and mitigation, you're just going to let this stuff spread like a cancer. Ducey's the same way. You know, it's the same way. He banned masks and vaccines, I think, in schools, but private businesses can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So, and I just think that like someday, and it might be DeSantis, maybe it's the guy after DeSantis, but the left in this country are going to pine for the days of Trump, because what's coming is going to be it's going to be worse than Trump. And it's like I said, DeSantis is going to do things that's going to make a lot of the small government conservatives uncomfortable. But you know, ultimately, it's what's necessary in order to preserve some semblance of freedom and liberty for the individual.
Well, and that's like, I mean, I'm vaxxed, and I've told the Gideon's Mob fans, you know, next year, you know, when we tour, I don't care if you're vaxxed or not. Everybody's welcome. And if the venue or if the club or bar is not going to do that, then we'll go play somewhere else.
It's like Clapton and Van Morrison doing the same thing. Clapton got, you know, he got his balls busted the other day because they said, well, he played a show that had a vaccine mandate. Well, what was buried in the lead was there was an opt-out.
Right.
So he's sticking to his guns and saying, no, you know, kind of like the comedians like Chrissy Mayer and others, they're saying, look, I'm only going to perform to places without vaccine mandates. I'm not going to enable or take part in any kind of discrimination.
I mean, from an economic standpoint, why do you want to piss half your customers off?
Yeah,
that doesn't make sense to me. Now Braxton, here's you're a vet. I mean, you have to be pretty upset about what they're doing with the military now, mandating vaccines in the military.
It's hard not to believe it's just a purge. I mean, like people have forgotten under the Obama administration, he passed a new rule through at the time where they were ejecting any NCO with a tattoo below the elbow.
I remember that.
From the combat era, you know, like you're not going to find an NCO that doesn't have a tattoo below the elbow. So they knew exactly what they were doing. And I think that this is just another example of that. They're trying to, I mean, I'm not trying to go full Alex Jones here, but I do think that it's hard not to believe that this whole thing is looking for, I mean, it's a compliance thing. They just want to know who's going to comply with the administration as is. And I think vaccine mandates are just
their excuse.
An excuse. Exactly.
Well, you look at since day one, like that Millie and the other jackass that said that we're looking for white supremacists. I'm like, dude,
Austin.
You got to be kidding. There are white supremacists, but they're like not even a fly speck on the map now. It's.
I don't think I've ever in my entire life met someone who was like a full-blown white. I think I've seen them. I saw some at a Henry Rollins concert one time. Because in the 90s, sometimes you get skinheads that go to Rollins. I don't know why.
Dude, I live in Idaho, which is supposed to be like white supremacist capital of America.
Yeah.
I never run into these people ever. I mean, it's really weird. And especially, it's funny, like I am what I am. And people will look at my profile picture or just me, and they just assume that I'm some kind of, racist guy. And it's just so historically illiterate. I mean, the cowboy culture has always been integrated. Like 90% of the stuff I do every day came from Spaniards,
Right.
And a lot of the cattle trade started, it was like a quarter of the people in the cattle trade, as far as on the cowboy side, like the day workers were black people, freed slaves or escaped slaves. I mean, it's
lots of black cowboys. I mean, then you got
tons.
like guys like Bass Reeves, who the Lone Ranger was based on. He's a black cowboy.
Yeah, I remember people criticizing Lonesome Dove because of the Dietz character. And it's like, well, that's like one of the most accurate parts of the movie. There was totally those kind of people.
Dietz wears the Union cap.
Yeah.
Which
never wanted to give up on a good garment.
Yeah.
He's got like that's just always been kind of how it is. And so you're right. And especially in the military, you'll never see a more kind of culturally or ethnically egalitarian bunch than guys in the military. We all, if someone walked into a barracks, they'd probably be mortified at some of the things that were being said, but it's all coming from, a very good place. I mean, like one of my best friends in the military, Chapman, he would always joke about, well, anyway, I'm not trying to get you kicked off YouTube. There are lots of, racial jokes going back and forth. But these are men that actually love each other, and I'm not saying men and women, because when I was in, it was just particularly the job that I was in was just all men. So, I think it's really bizarre the way that they're making this woke thing in the military into a story, because it makes no sense. I mean, they forced integration in the military in 68 or something.
Woodrow Wilson separated all three, and that's why it's like my grandfather, once he was blown off of a Jeep and had such bad tinnitus during the Battle of the Bulge, they pulled him off the front. They put him in charge of a black motorcade. And I asked him, I said, Papa, why were they all black? And he said, because Woodrow Wilson segregated the army.
Right.
And then obviously 68 or whatever, integrated again. It's just crazy. If you want to know what the barracks sound like, watch Generation Kill. It opens up.
Totally. There's never been a better portrayal of Iraq than Generation Kill. That is that
is that a movie or a TV?
HBO did it, six-part series, and it's based on Evan Wright's book, which is a bunch of articles he wrote for Rolling Stone. He was one of the few embedded reporters that were stuck in Humvees in the Blitzkrieg to Baghdad by First Recon, and it's it's got a bunch of technical advisors on it from actual First Recon. Rudy Reyes is in it. There's a bunch of guys who actually play themselves, and it was done by the guys who did The Wire. It's David Simon and another guy.
I'll have to check it out.
It's excellent. I wish it went on longer, but the book is better because you get a little bit more meat, but they really did a great job of adapting the book and making it feel real. And part of what I felt gave it such authenticity was the way guys talk.
Yeah.
And the way they talk amongst each other and the way they bullshit and the way they bust each other's balls. And there's so many off color, just crazy, things that people would just go nuts for. You could never get that series made today. And honestly, I'm amazed that HBO still has it on HBO Max. You can watch it anytime you want. They haven't pulled it.
What's what kills me, like that Netflix. I quit my Netflix subscription last year because one show I love is Always Sunny, because Always Sunny is so they're such bad people. You know, they make Jerry Seinfeld look and those crew look like saints. I mean, they're bad people, and they pulled the episode with Lethal Weapon, which is my favorite episode, and they pulled it because of the blackface. And I'm like, idiots. It's anti-blackface. Like the whole episode, they're like, "What the hell are you doing? You can't do this."
Well, Christian, didn't they pull an Office episode recently because of some?
Yeah, Diversity Day. They've pulled other shows. Sarah Silverman had a show where she was using blackface to depict kind of a woke sentiment about culture and about being Jewish and being black. It's never about context. It's all about knee-jerk reactions.
Right.
Yeah. It's all about clamping down on our ability to discuss complicated issues. And humor is often the best way to do it, but they don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. Humor is always the way to bring people together. And that's largely why they've gone after comedy so hard.
Wait a second. You look at Blazing Saddles. That could never be made today. And Richard Pryor wrote most of that.
Yeah.
I mean, people are like, well, Mel Brooks, white Jewish guy wrote it. No, a black guy wrote most of that.
And he was supposed to star in it, but they, the studio was like, this guy's got kind of a drug problem, so we're a little nervous about him. And even Richard said that only Levon could have played. Levon
did an amazing job.
Yeah, I mean, he's perfect in that. Yeah, I've always said Blazing Saddles did more to cure race relations than the Great Society and all of the war on poverty. It unified people because, again, you've got a Jewish guy teamed up with a black guy, and they end up. And they just take a flamethrower to everybody. Everything. And that was the genius of the Lampoon, was that if you're going to lampoon everybody, then that means that nobody's offended. Right. It's funny because Neil Adams, who's a Marvel artist, I just thought of this over the Ed Bennett situation, getting fired at Marvel. Neil Adams did a bunch of work. A lot of Marvel guys did work for the National Lampoon in the 70s. And they did things like The Amazing Zimmerman, Son of God. These are all things Neil Adams did, and they are hugely offensive. And it's like, I was thinking the other day, I'm like, I hope nobody goes back and looks at Neil Adams stuff because it's going to be dubbed anti-Semitic, and he's a huge lib. So and I think to myself, Neil is just like providing cover for himself in case somebody goes back.
I often think that about Neil Adams because he is like the worst case of TDS in the comics industry. That I wonder that is he doing that because, oh shit, what did I do? There's nothing wrong with what he did. It's called parody. It makes
it's hilarious. It's still really funny, the comics that he did at the time. But a lot of the times the National Lampoon would take stuff from these artists and these writers that they could never get published at Marvel or DC. Or Tony Hedra and the guys would write stuff and then give it to guys like Neil Adams because he'd bring that level of authenticity. So it's one of those things where art was functioning at a very high level, I think, in a lot of ways, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now we're kind of just hit this wall. But we're going to create our own. I just think that's just kind of where it's going, and then we're going to create our own safe spaces by balkanizing further and moving to red states. Right. So, Brian, how long do you have before you bail out?
I'm glad you mentioned that. I have to go right about now because.
No, I meant out of California.
Oh no, I don't live in California. I live in Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
But that's a blue. That's.
I was going to say that's blue too, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got problems of its own. I don't know. I'll put up with it because I think that if you don't fight back, it's just going to roll over you. And at least it's better to lose and say. But I gave my all. I left it all in the field.
I'm in tactical retreat mode right now. And this is Washington was probably made famous by way of tactical retreat. There's probably nobody that performed the tactical retreat like Washington. I mean, generals and people study him at this point from that standpoint. And I just think I'm going to tactically retreat to Texas, and which is Malice just ended up out there. He's in Austin. He just moved.
But do you think that's becoming more purple? I think now.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I know
Austin is pretty blue.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that, but it's interesting. I read the other day that Florida is getting the influx of people coming into Florida are registering Republican. It's almost 2-1 at this point.
Yeah. Wow.
So I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of people moving to red places to keep them red. But you never know how these people are going to register when they, because a lot of them are bailing out of Cali.
Idaho.
Christian, who is that?
Yeah, right.
That is Rudy, the semi-wonder dog. He's getting a little restless here. So
he is cute.
Yeah. He's a boxer, right?
Yeah, he's the light of my life, and he's very affectionate, and so he's super clumsy too, so he'll like step on your head and things.
Boxers are great. They're can be high energy sometimes. They can be kind of ball lightning.
Yeah, he's about 7, so he's slowing down a little bit, but he's amazing. And my wife's had breast cancer. She's sort of just finished all her treatments, and between that and COVID, like I needed like a little guy to kind of save my sanity, and he's been the guy.
They're such huge stress relievers, man. I mean,
every day when I say my prayers, I add with, "Dear God, let me be the person my dog thinks I am today. And let me be to other people that my dog thinks I am." You know.
Yeah.
But on that note, I got a bolt. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Brian, do you want to plug anything on your way out?
Gideon's Mob, our first 2 albums, the self-titled album and Space Cadet Supernova. It's a progressive rock, so you get Pink Floyd, Rush, Yes, that type of sound.
And Dean Cain said you had some Bowie influence.
Bowie's probably Bowie and the Beatles are probably my biggest.
Yeah, influence. Dean tweeted about you the other day, which is great because Dean's a great guy. I mean,
he's a good guy, very cool. Good guy.
Yeah.
And then our new album will be out next. Every day gets a little further back, but I'm going to say probably March or April. And that one's called Sonic Library.
Where can they go to buy?
You can go to iTunes, Apple, Amazon, all the platforms. And on Amazon and eBay, you can get the CDs, which is great. Okay, that's good. That's good to know. And then where can people find you on social media? I'm on Twitter at Gideon's Mob. I can't figure out what the name of it is. Let me see. Gideon's Mob Band 1. And you can follow me there. And I'm a loudmouth on Twitter. And so... Cool. Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Nice meeting you guys. Yeah, we'll have you back.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, dude.
Trying to find you on Twitter. Thank you.
Take it easy. All right. Do we want to wrap this up?
Yeah, I've got some work to do as well, honestly. So I can. No sweat. I've got my wife and kids are away right now, which is sort of valuable. I can get stuff done. So. Yeah, man. The bacheloring it. That's with your dog. I mean, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Absolutely, Christian. Where can we find your new podcast? And also it should be on all the platforms. iTunes, Stitcher, you name it, it'll be there. Right on Hollywood, once a week. I'm hoping to go twice a week in the near future. I want to kind of start modestly, and then the website's HollywoodInToto.com, and on Twitter it's at HollywoodInToto. Yeah, it's a great site. I just I go there pretty much every day, just looking because you've got new stuff pretty much every day. And between Hollywood and Toto and Bounding into Comics, those are my two sort of pop culture websites that I sort of bounce back and forth with because they are run by right of center people, and I know I can trust it. So, Braxton, obviously Glass Factory. Where can people pick that up? I know you got a hardcover too. I do. We actually just did another run. All my crap talking on Twitter is kind of paid off in that sense, but we just did another run of hardcovers that are available if you want an autographed copy. Actually, the only place you can get hardcovers right now is at BraxtonMcCoy.com/The Glass Factory. Pretty easy to find. Even if you just go to BraxtonMcCoy.com, there'll be like a button at the top says like now available in hardcover. You can get them there, and I will sign them, and my wife will address the envelopes. That's kind of the system that we have going right now. That's right. Man's got to know his limitations. That's right. Yes, that is right. Right on. All right. I'm on Twitter at BrettRSmith76, which is detailed down there. Also, check out my new project, which is BlackTideRising.com. It's a graphic novel, 56 pages, full color. Chuck Dixon, Durla Santa Cruz doing the art. It's an adaptation of a national best-selling book series called Black Tide Rising by John Ringo, and it's a zombie apocalypse, but it's unwoke, un-PC. It's actually a hopeful story, and it centers around a special forces family that is escaping the island of Manhattan in the midst of a zombie apocalypse. So it's a lot of fun. We crowdfunded it. It's going to be done by the end of October, but you can still pre-order it, and then we're going to have retail sales after that once it's done. So hoping for historical fiction. Dude, it's like I've been talking, these guys bought the rights. They bought the graphic rights maybe a year and a half ago, and we talked about it for about 6 months, and then we finally
raised some money to produce the interior pages and the cover so we could have something to launch for an Indiegogo campaign. And it just landed right smack in the middle of COVID, dude. And in our book, John Ringo's books, his original Black Tide Rising books, the zombie apocalypse is a virus that transfers from human to human. It's an aerosol form. They have no idea where it came from, but it basically it's kind of like a, it gives humans sort of like rabies on steroids. So it was just the timing, dude. I couldn't believe it. It was just kind of uncanny. And those books were written years ago. So it's not like even the original books had any knowledge of the potential of something like COVID. But there were so many weird overlaps to what was going on and what goes on in the story. It's just kind of bizarre. And it was good timing, even though, you know, I wish it never happened. COVID, not the book. Anyway, we'll wrap it up. We're out of time. Everyone make sure and subscribe to Political Punk's channel on Rumble and YouTube so you never miss any of our new shows. Like and share this video far and wide, and also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, stay frosty. Thanks, everybody.